Hey guys, so Ashveil just got hit with what looks like a pretty massive nerf in version 3, losing nearly half of his attack multipliers. And yeah, the community is pretty livid right now. But the real question is, did this actually send Ashveil to tier 5, or did it just change how he's supposed to be played? Today I'm gonna go through the version 3 changes and what they actually mean in practice, and how bad the changes really are. I'll try to break this down as objectively as possible from my perspective, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. With that said, let's get right into it. Before we get into all the details, let's start with the most important takeaway. The short answer is, Ashveil isn't dead and is legitimately just fine. But now he can't really be played as a main DPS anymore, with his sub DPS playstyle being more optimal. He went from being the most broken character to ever be released to now being in Evernight tier in overall power. Yes, Evernight, which I'll of course show later. Now, this isn't something you can really tell at first glance, with the nerfs looking really bad on paper. So let's see what exactly happened to Ashveil to make me think like this. Firstly, let's see the number changes. Multiplier wise, his skill lost 33.33% damage. This honestly doesn't matter. His ult lost 45 to 55% damage depending on the gluttony stacks, which is really big. And his follow-up attack lost 44% damage, which again is pretty significant. On paper, let's just say he lost around 44% of his original damage in terms of raw multipliers. And yeah, it looks pretty bad. But the percent stuff alone means nothing, as there's no reference in what that means. So let's compare it with the other follow-up units. Follow-up attack wise, he still has the highest multiplier, which is pretty cool, and it's now not double or triple the others now. However, the important thing is actually the ult. Prior to this, multiplier wise, one Ashveil ult, depending on your gluttony stacks, equaled 2 to 4 Fei Xiao ults. This was really freaking strong, as you could expect. But it was balanced around the fact that it had a very high ult cost, which I stated damage wise in my previous video. It's actually on par with a Fei Xiao ult. Fei Xiao has smaller multipliers, but you got it significantly faster. But now, an Ashveil ult is roughly 1.14 to 1.72 Fei Xiao ult. Now, this may sound weak, but due to the ult cost change and also trace changes, which we'll later see, he should be going from a 4-turn ult to a 2-turn ult. Yes, double the amount of ults. But before we compare the damage again, in this context we also have to put in the gluttony stacks, which post version 3, he can make 7 per ult. So let's say he now gets a 1000% ult motion value per 2 skills or turns. Previously, he'd get all 12 gluttony stacks in 4 turns, so the whole 2660% multiplier. So 665% per turn. Now, using that math, we can see that it's actually only 24.8% less damage via ult, which actually isn't that bad at all. Not screenshot of course, but overall damage. And his follow-ups, while yes, much weaker, are still the strongest of the bunch. But we're actually not quite done yet, as there's still part 2. As mentioned prior, the follow-up is 44% weaker, while the ult is around 24.8% less damage in a rotation. And that's where the final change and nerf comes in. His trace 2, instead of giving 80% team-wide damage bonus, it's now 80% self-damage bonus, plus scaling amounts from 0 to 120% depending on how many gluttony he has. Now, I have seen the Chinese translations from 3 different sites, and yes, he indeed is not an AoE buffer anymore in this regard. And I'll get to that later. Anyways, when we factor this additional part in, put him in his new best E0S1 team, which gives him 212 damage bonus, his new trace should generally give him 0 to 70 damage bonus before we ult. For the ult, I'm giving him the full 70, but for the follow-up, I'm just gonna half it and average it to 30. So the ult's now getting a 22.4% damage increase and the follow-up 9.44%. Now, if we were to factor in the original damage loss, plus this damage bonus, it should be 92% of the original damage. Now, this does make sense as we are getting double the amount of ults. As for the follow-up attack, it'll now be at 61.28% of the final damage. However, that's not the final change. he got his base stats increased. In terms of E0S1, he got 15.5% more base attack, which quite literally is 15.5% more final damage. So, including this, the final Ashveil in terms of damage, his ults should be doing 6.35% more damage than pre-nerf, with follow-ups dealing 30% less.
I'll make that deal. How about you bitch? You make that deal?
I'd make that deal.
I don't blame you. Damn good deal.
So, conclusion, damage-wise, it should be pretty relative. But the trade-off is that he now has faster ults and also more synergy with past and even potentially future units. So overall, I think he's in a very solid spot. Now, I also have a few more things to mention before we move on to the next section. Firstly, he doesn't really need speed anymore as he's now very similar to Fei Xiao, who is relying on teammates to generate charge or energy. And secondly, we're not going hypercarry main DPS. And it's not because of the damage, but because our supports can't generate energy for all. Moving on, let's talk about his buffs. Because as some people have mentioned, why the heck did they touch that 80% team-wide damage bonus? If they wanted to shift him into a sub DPS, why are they removing his supportive capabilities? Well, that answer is pretty simple. It's because he was the strongest buffer in the game. A sub DPS was the strongest buffer in the game. Using my previous video, I state that Robin gives 308 crit damage worth of stats with her entire kit. Ashveil pre-version 3 gave 253 plus 40% defense rate, which should in turn make him buff more than Robin in their ideal teams. That's pretty crazy, by the way. For more reference, Sporkle gives 172 crit, 30 vulnerability, and 10 pen, which again, Ashveil still mogs. With that in mind, I hope you can see how this guy was legitimately OP. Not to mention his damage is still relatively fine. But now with this nerf, he's Evernight tier. No, I mean that quite literally, he's Evernight tier. He literally provides himself the same amount of self buffs and team-wide amp as Evernight. Yeah, there's not much else to say. With that in mind, let's get to my conclusion. Right now, Ashveil is in a perfect spot. Instead of being Thanos and being stronger than every DPS, sub DPS, and support, and having the lowest cost clear, he's now like the Evernight of a follow-up team. Which, by the way, is exactly what follow-up needed in my opinion. Now, they just need an OP sustain because that's literally what makes teams OP. When you look at Remembrance, Hypercarry Dot, they got OP sustains. Break on the other hand, we don't talk about Break. Now, in other words, Ashveil rebalanced his buffs and traded in some of his multipliers to be a lot more synergistic with the follow-up archetype. And I think this is great, as it means he has a lot of potential to grow with future units. And I really like his new energy mechanic because there's probably a lot of stupid stuff you can pull off with this. Getting 8 flat energy per ally hit is quite literally tutorial Lycon on crack. And just like how people abuse tutorial, I'm pretty sure people will find a way to abuse Ashveil as well. And I'm all for it. And yeah, that's my analysis of Ashveil. I really don't think there's a reason to doom post him as he's 100% going in tier 0. Prior to this, we would have had to make an Ashveil tier, but I'm glad he doesn't break the current meta and usher in more power creep. Bringing life to our older units by being strong and having the potential to work with new ones is fantastic in terms of balancing. Now, I've been trying to work on a currency wars video for the longest time, but kept getting interrupted. And now with 4.1 dropping in like a week, I'm gonna get delayed again. Hopefully I'll catch you guys there, and yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and peace.